Rain slid down the glass in silver streams, turning the city outside into a blur of moving shadows and glowing lights. The cafe, tucked neatly on the corner of a busy street, was alive with the low hum of conversation, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine, and the comforting clatter of cups being set down onto saucers. The warmth inside was a shield against the gray morning beyond, where umbrellas bobbed and car tires splashed through puddles. People leaned over their laptops, their voices blending into the steady rhythm of the place, a kind of refuge from the storm. The door opened with a sharp creak, and a gust of cold air swept in, curling around ankles and raising a murmur of irritation from those seated closest to the entrance. A man stepped in, his shoulders hunched, his threadbare coat dripping with rain. His scuffed shoes left faint, dark prints across the polished floor, and his damp salt and pepper hair clung stubbornly to his forehead. He looked out of place, like a stray that had wandered into a room full of polished pedigrees. Still, he moved forward with a slow dignity, his eyes carrying a tiredness that spoke of roads long walked, hardships endured, and burdens carried. Silently, he paused at the counter, glancing up at the chalkboard menu with its neatly written choices of lattes, mochas, and flavored syrups. When he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper, yet clear enough to carry through the hum of the cafe. "A black coffee, please." The barista, a young man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, tapped a few keys on the register. The price flashed up, small but heavy in that moment. The old man patted at his coat pockets, his movements growing frantic as his fingers searched deeper and deeper. His chest rose and fell faster. A flicker of panic touched his eyes. I must have left my wallet at home," he stammered, his voice thick with embarrassment. He swallowed hard and shifted uneasily on his feet. "If it's all right, could I just sit here for a while? Until the rain lets up?" The barista leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, and let out a mocking laugh. "This isn't a shelter, old man. No money, no coffee, no place to sit." His voice rose deliberately, drawing the attention of nearby customers. Heads turned, smirks spread. From a corner table, someone chuckled. "Imagine coming into a cafe without a dime. Times must be tough if beggars want to play coffeehouse critics." Another voice chimed in, sharp with disdain. "Pathetic. Some people have no shame." The man's cheeks flushed crimson as the weight of their laughter pressed down on him. He bowed his head and turned toward the door, his shoulders hunched, under a humiliation heavier than the rain outside. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the handle. "Wait." The word came from across the room, steady and clear, cutting through the mockery like a blade through smoke. Emma, balancing a tray of empty cups, stood rooted by the counter. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, her hazel eyes burning with indignation. Without hesitation, she set the tray down with a clatter that silenced even the whispers, reached into the pocket of her modest uniform, and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. She laid it firmly on the counter. "That's enough for his coffee," she said, her voice unwavering. The barista's smirk faltered. "Emma, you don't have to. I'm covering it." She cut in. Her gaze swept the cafe, meeting the eyes of those who had laughed. "Kindness isn't a transaction. It doesn't make us smaller to help someone in need." But mocking a man who has nothing, her voice grew firm, resonant. "That reveals real smallness." Silence fell. The earlier amusement drained from the room, replaced with an uneasy stillness. No one met her eyes now. They busied themselves with their cups, their phones, anything but the truth she had spoken aloud. Emma turned back to the man, her expression softening. "Please, have a seat." "By the window," she said gently. "I'll bring your coffee over." She offered him a small smile, the kind that carried more warmth than any cup of coffee could. The man met her gaze, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time since stepping inside, he straightened a little, as if her words had lifted the weight pressing on him. With a quiet nod, he moved to the window and sat down, watching the rain cascade down the glass dot as Emma prepared his coffee. The cafe felt different, subdued, humble. The whispers had died, the mockery silenced. In that moment, Emma stood not as just a waitress in a modest uniform, but as a quiet force of dignity. And the old man, once humiliated and dismissed, found solace in the simple truth of being seen. Yet, as he sat with the steaming cup warming his hands, there was something in his eyes, something that lingered behind the gratitude and weariness, a glimmer of pride, of mystery, of a story not yet told. Who was he really? And why did he, even in rags, feel like a man who carried secrets far beyond the walls of this cafe. Asterisk, the rain had softened into a mist by the time Emma's shift ended, though the city still carried that damp, heavy air that clung to skin and clothes alike. The neon glow of shop signs flickered across puddles as she stepped outside, pulling her thin coat tight around her shoulders. Her shoes slapped against the wet pavement, the sound oddly loud in the quiet of the evening. She didn't hurry. Rushing never changed the fact that her apartment waited at the end of the same cracked street, the same narrow stairs, the same drafty window. Still, she carried something different in her chest that night, an echo of the old man's eyes when she had handed him his coffee. Gratitude, yes, but something else too, a depth, a weight she couldn't quite name. By the time she reached the building, the familiar smell of mildew and fried food greeted her from the hallway. The bulb above the stairwell buzzed weakly, casting more shadow than light. She climbed slowly, her body heavy with fatigue. When she unlocked the apartment door, warmth hit her not from a heater, but from the faint glow of a small lamp and the sight of her sister, Lily, curled under a blanket on the couch. Lily's pale skin seemed almost translucent under the thin fabric, and her breathing rattled faintly in her chest. "You're late," Lily murmured, her voice thin. Asterisk, Emma forced a smile, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Got caught in the rain. She hung her coat, careful to keep her tired size to herself, then moved to the tiny kitchenette. The cupboards were nearly bare. She reheated yesterday's porridge in a dented pot, sprinkling in a pinch of salt to disguise its blandness. When she placed the bowl into Lily's hands, the girl's eyes flickered with a mixture of gratitude and apology. "You should eat too," Lily whispered. "I had something at work," Emma lied easily. Though her stomach ached with hunger, she sat beside her sister, tucking the blanket closer around her shoulders. For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, but not unkind, just filled with the quiet knowledge of sacrifice. Later, when Lily slept, Emma sat by the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The city lights blinked faintly through streaks of rain, and in her reflection, she saw more weariness than she wanted to admit. Her wallet lay open on the sill beside her, $3, one subway token, and a faded photo of their mother smiling with the same hazel eyes Emma saw in her own mirror every day. She traced the photo's edges with her thumb, remembering a market long ago. Her mother collapsing suddenly, and strangers stepping over them as if they were invisible. Only one woman had stopped, an old woman with nothing but a patched skirt and a shawl to offer. That shawl had been warm against her shoulders, warmer than the indifference of the crowd. That moment had carved itself into Emma's soul like a vow, asterisk, and that vow had been why. When she saw the man in the cafe humiliated, something inside her refused to stay silent. It hadn't been a choice. It had been a promise remembered. But now, sitting in the dim light of their apartment, she wondered, who was he? Why did his eyes, even under the weight of shame, still hold a kind of pride? He hadn't looked like someone broken. He had looked like someone burdened with a story too big to share. The next morning, whispers followed her through the cafe. Marcy, the other waitress, smirked when Emma walked past. "Must be nice," she muttered. "Playing hero for strangers when you can barely pay rent." Josh, the busboy, chuckled. Bet she thought he was some secret millionaire in disguise. "Hate to break it to you, Em, but fairy tales don't happen here." Emma ignored them, but their words clung to her still as she wiped tables and poured coffee. She caught herself glancing toward the window seat where he had sat, empty now, but her mind replayed his eyes, his silence, the way he had straightened his back when she offered kindness. Asterisk, she didn't know it yet, but the man she had defended wasn't just carrying secrets. He was watching her now, from a place she couldn't see, measuring her not with the eyes of a beggar, but with the gaze of someone searching for truth in a world full of pretense. And Emma, tired and unadorned, had passed a test she never even knew she had taken. What she could not know, what no one in that cafe could have guessed, was that the man she bought coffee for was not merely grateful. He was a billionaire, with the power to change her world, and he was not done with her yet. The cafe had returned to its usual rhythm by the end of the week. Steam hissed, cups clinked, and conversations rose and fell in their ordinary patterns. To Emma, it all felt strangely louder than before. Maybe it was the stairs, maybe the whispers she had heard as she moved between tables. Maybe just her own mind looping the memory of that soaked, humiliated man sitting alone at the window. Whatever it was, she carried it with her like a second shadow. That morning began no different. She tied her apron with practiced motions, tucked her hair back into a loose ponytail, and forced a polite smile as she greeted regulars. Outside, the rain had cleared, leaving the streets glistening under the sharp light of the sun. People walked briskly, umbrellas folded at their sides, the city humming with energy. The bell above the door chimed. Emma barely looked up until she felt it. The cafe's air shifted. Conversation slowed, the noise dropping as curiosity prickled through the room. She turned, cloth still in her hand, and froze. The man who entered was nothing like the one who had stumbled in days before. He stood tall, his posture commanding. A charcoal gray suit clung to him perfectly, his polished shoes tapping softly. Against the floor, a silk scarf lay draped with effortless elegance, and his salt-tan pepper hair was neatly combed back, catching the morning light. His face, no longer shadowed by shame, carried a quiet authority, yet his eyes those same. Eyes were unmistakable. It was him. Emma's breath caught in her chest. She felt her pulse thudding in her ears as he walked, not to the counter, but to the table by the window, the same seat he had occupied when he looked so worn, so beaten. He lowered himself into the chair with calm precision, folded his hands on the table, and simply waited. Emma gripped the cloth tighter, her palms damp. A dozen thoughts ran through her mind. Should she pretend not to recognize him? Should she confront him, or just walk away and hope someone else would take the table? But her feet moved before her doubts could root her in place. She approached, slowly, each step heavy with questions. When she reached him, she placed the menu on the table, her voice carefully neutral. "Good morning. Would you like to see? I'm not here to order." His words cut through her composure like glass. She froze, the menu still in her hand. "I only have one question," he continued, his gaze steady on hers. "Why did you help me?" Emma's mouth went dry. She lowered the menu slowly and pulled out the chair across from him, sitting down. Without quite realizing she had chosen to, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Because I couldn't stand there and watch it happen. You didn't know me," he said. "You had nothing to gain." She hesitated, her hazel eyes searching his face. "You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small, and I know that feeling." That was enough. Silence stretched between them. The cafe noise faded to a dull hum, as though the world had stepped back to let them speak. Then Emma leaned forward, her voice trembling with memory. "When I was 17, my mother collapsed in a market. People walked around her like she was a burden. No one stopped except for one old woman. She had nothing herself, but she stayed. She wrapped me in her shawl and gave us water. I promised myself I would do the same if I ever had the chance. That day, with you, I remember that promise." The man listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed on hers. When she fell silent, he leaned back, studying her as though weighing her soul. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Do you read?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Books?" He nodded. "I used to." She admitted, "Not much lately. Life doesn't leave much time. But when I did, I like stories about ordinary people doing brave things." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good choice." What began as a question became a conversation. They spoke of books and music, of why people grow cruel when they feel powerless, of the loneliness hidden in crowded rooms. He mentioned authors Emma had never read, and she didn't pretend to know them. She responded with curiosity, not pretense. And he seemed to value that more than knowledge itself. Minutes slipped by unnoticed. At one point, Emma laughed, truly laughed for the first time in days. It startled her. The sound of it, how alive it felt. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect me to be?" She shrugged, smiling despite herself, someone who just wanted to say thank you and then disappear. His eyes softened. "I've had wealth for a long time," he said quietly, "but very few people have made me feel human again. That day, you did." Her smile faltered, her throat tightening. She wanted to answer, but words failed. When their conversation finally ended, he stood, leaving her with nothing more than a polite nod before walking out into the sunlight. The cafe returned to its noise, its chatter, but Emma sat frozen in place, her heart racing. She had no idea what game she had stepped into or why her small act of kindness had drawn her into the orbit of a man who felt both familiar and impossibly unreachable. And she had no idea that this was only the beginning. Asterisk, the invitation arrived on a Thursday, folded inside an envelope so heavy it felt out of place in Emma's tiny mailbox. The The paper itself was thick, cream-colored, its edges embossed with gold filigree. She stood frozen in the dim hallway of her apartment building, staring at her own name written in careful, deliberate script across the front, Emma L. Bennett. No return address. No clue who had sent it. Her hands trembled as she slid it open with a fingernail. Inside was a single card, stamped with the crest of the Annesley A, the most exclusive 5-star hotel in the city, a place whispered about in the cafe whenever rich businessmen came through, a place Emma had only ever glimpsed from the outside, its glass walls shining like ice against the skyline. The card was simple, but the words etched in gold seemed to carry weight far heavier than the paper could bear. Dinner. Saturday, 8 p.m. Guest of Charles H. Everlyn. Emma's breath caught in her chest. She read the name again, certain she had. Imagine it. Charles H. Everlyn. She didn't need to be part of the city's high society to know who he was. His name appeared in newspapers and financial reports, spoken in hushed tones as if the man himself were less human and more legend. A billionaire, a man whose wealth could buy entire city blocks. And somehow, impossibly, this card bore her name beside his. As she sank onto the edge of her bed, the envelope sliding from her lap onto the peeling linoleum floor. Lily, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, looked up with curiosity. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hoarse but gentle. Emma held up the card like it might vanish if she blinked. "An invitation to dinner at the Annesley." Lily's brows furrowed. "The hotel with the glass tower?" "Yes." "Who sent it?" Emma swallowed hard. "Charles H. Everlyn." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, Lily's lips parted. "The man from the cafe." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She couldn't bring herself to say the rest aloud, that the ragged man she had defended, the man mocked as a beggar, was actually him. The realization felt too large, too absurd. Lily shifted, coughing into her sleeve, then whispered, "You should go." Emma shook her head instantly. "Lily, no. Look at me. I can't walk into that place. I can't sit across from him like I belong there." "You don't have to belong," Lily said softly, her gaze steady despite the weariness in her eyes. "Maybe he just wants someone real, someone who doesn't care about his money. That's what you gave him that day." Emma stared at her sister, torn between fear and something else she didn't dare name. She folded the card back into its envelope, but her fingers lingered on the embossed crest as though it might brand her skin. The days until Saturday stretched like an eternity. At the cafe, whispers followed her more openly now. Marcy's laugh cut sharp whenever Emma walked past. "Guess she thinks she's being courted by royalty," she sneered to Josh, who chuckled in reply. "Waitresses don't end up at the Annesley, not unless they're carrying trays." Emma forced herself not to react, but their words gnawed at her. Still, each night she unfolded the invitation again, running her thumb over the gold lettering until it seemed to burn into her. Lots. She could not deny the pull it had, the way it unsettled her with equal parts dread and longing. Saturday came faster than she expected. The city was alive with weekend crowds, neon signs glowing over the streets as she stood in front of the Annesley's glass entrance. Her reflection in the towering doors made her heart sink. Her thrift store dress, neatly pressed but plain, her coat too thin for the evening chill, her hair tied back with the simplest band she could find. Everything about her screamed out of place, yet she drew a breath and stepped inside. The lobby swallowed her whole, marble floors gleaming like mirrors, chandeliers raining down golden light, guests gliding past in tailored suits and gowns that glittered like stars. She felt every eye on her, though perhaps it was only her imagination, her nerves sharpening every detail. At the far end of the room, a Mactor D in a crisp black suit approached. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, as if it were perfectly natural for her name to be on his lips. She nodded, her voice lost somewhere in her throat. "This way." She followed him across the vast lobby, her footsteps echoing in her ears, until they reached a private dining hall. The doors opened silently, and there, standing beside a long table adorned with crystal glasses and silver candlesticks, was the man himself, Charles. Not in rags, not in disguise, but fully revealed, tall, commanding, the sharp lines of his tailored suit emphasizing the strength in his frame. His salt-and-pepper hair caught the light, his eyes the same piercing ones that had looked at her across the cafe table, now filled with something deeper, something heavier. "Emma," he said simply, his voice low, but carrying easily in the stillness of the room. Her knees nearly buckled at the sound of her name spoken by him. In this place, She clutched the strap of her bag, her pulse racing so loud she thought the chandeliers might tremble with it. And as he gestured for her to join him, she realized the cafe incident had only been the beginning. She had stepped into something vast, something dangerous, something that could change her life forever. Asterisk, the dining room felt more like a throne hall than a place to eat. The ceilings rose impossibly high, painted with murals that glimmered faintly in the candlelight. The air carried the faint scent of roses and polished wood, heavy with silence. Emma stood at the threshold, her pulse thrumming like a trapped bird. Across the long table, Charles straightened, his presence filling the space even before he spoke. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chair at his side rather than the far end. His voice was calm, but it held the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. Emma moved forward slowly, her heels clicking on the marble, her hands clutching her worn coat like a shield. She lowered herself into the chair, acutely aware of the crisp linen beneath her palms, the glitter of crystal glasses catching candlelight. She felt painfully out of place, like a shadow sitting in the middle of a world made of gold. Charles studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you honesty. The man you saw in the cafe, wet and humiliated, was me. And the man you see now, in this suit, is also me. But most people only see one or the other. You saw both. That is why you are here." Emma's throat tightened. She managed a small nod, though her voice broke when she whispered, "Why disguise yourself at all? Why walk into a cafe like that?" He leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward the candles. "Because when you are born into wealth, or when you build it, people stop seeing you. They see only what you can give them or what they can take. Money blinds people. But disguise," his lips curled into a faint smile, "disguise shows you the truth." Emma's fingers twisted in her lap. "So that day, I was a test." His eyes snapped back to hers, sharp and steady. "No, not a test. A revelation." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Do you know how many people mocked me? How many looked away? And then you, someone with nothing to gain, with barely enough for yourself, gave me dignity when no one else would. That was no test. That was the moment I realized something rare still exists." The words struck her like a blow and a bomb all at once. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. "And now, why bring me here?" He let out a quiet laugh, though it held no humor. "Because you intrigue me, Emma. You are not impressed by wealth. You are not afraid of mockery. You live with a strength that most in this room of chandeliers and marble will never understand." His voice softened. "And I am tired of marble. I am tired of chandeliers. I am tired of people who only see the gold in my pocket and not the man who carries it." The waiters arrived silently, placing silver domed dishes before them, pouring wine that sparkled like rubies. Emma didn't touch hers. She couldn't. Her mind spun too fast, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. As they ate, Charles spoke not of business empires or stock markets, but of loneliness, of boardrooms filled with hollow voices, of friends who vanished when the checks stopped coming, of nights spent in towers of glass with nothing but silence echoing against the walls. He spoke of betrayals, partners who stole, lovers who lied, family who treated his fortune as their birthright. Emma listened, her chest aching with a mixture of disbelief and empathy. This was not the invincible billionaire from headlines. This was a man confessing the cost of a life most envied, and for the first time, she realized wealth did not shield him, it isolated him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but steady. "I don't know what you want from me, Charles. If this is gratitude, you already have it. If it's something more, I don't understand." He set down his glass, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want gratitude. I don't want admiration. I want truth. And I believe you're one of the few who can give it to me." The room seemed to shrink, the space between them charged with something she couldn't name. Emma's heart pounded as silence wrapped around them. For a moment, she saw not the billionaire or the beggar, but simply a man lonely, searching, perhaps even afraid. Yet in the back of her mind, questions burned like embers. Why her? Why now? What would this connection cost her if she stepped into his world? Charles must have read the doubt flickering in her eyes, because he leaned back and said something that made her breath catch. "You think this is the end of a story. It isn't. It's only the beginning. You've already changed more than you know." Her fork slipped against the plate with a faint scrape. She swallowed hard, staring at him as if seeing a stranger. She both recognized and feared, and in that moment, Emma understood one truth, whatever this was. She had stepped into a current far stronger than she could control, and it was already pulling her deeper. The night deepened, and with it came a hush that seemed to press against the windows of the private dining room. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance, a glittering sprawl of towers and neon. Inside, only the people remained at the table: Emma, hands folded tight in her lap, and Charles, the billionaire who had once sat shivering in a threadbare coat, now revealed in the full armor of wealth. Yet, despite the marble floors and silver candlesticks, Emma felt no safety here, only the weight of secrets circling the room like shadows. Charles lifted his glass, swirling the dark wine, though he barely drank it. His eyes held her steadily, almost as though he were searching for something buried beneath her skin. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before, quieter, almost stripped of the command it usually carried. "You ask why I disguise myself," he said. "The truth is, wealth is both a crown and a cage. People look at me and see a fortune, not a man. Friends want access, lovers want comfort, partners want leverage. Everyone wants something. But you didn't even want." Thanks. Emma said nothing. She could hear her heart in her ears, steady but restless. He leaned forward, his hands clasped as though confessing in a chapel. "When I was younger, I believed money could buy loyalty. I built companies, raised empires, gave jobs to thousands. I trusted, and one by one, the people closest to me taught me that loyalty is purchased until someone else pays more. My oldest partner siphoned millions from under my nose. A woman I nearly married left me on the day of our engagement, after signing half my assets into her name, even family." His jaw clenched, his eyes hardening for a moment. Even blood can turn to strangers when greed seeps in. Emma felt her throat tighten. She could see the strain in his face, the flicker of pain poorly hidden beneath composure. He wasn't boasting now. He wasn't performing. He was exposing scars. "Do you know what it's like," he continued, "to be surrounded by rooms full of people and yet realize not one of them would stay? If the gold was gone," Emma thought of her sister curled under a blanket, thought of porridge reheated in a dented pot, thought of $3 crumpled folded neatly back into her wallet. She thought of the market years ago. Her mother collapsed on the ground, strangers stepping over them. She thought of the one woman who stayed, and she whispered, "Yes, I do." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Charles seemed to breathe differently, like a man unclenching a fist he'd held for decades. Emma leaned back, though, her chest heavy with doubt. "But why me? Why bring me here? I'm no one, Charles. I serve coffee, I wipe tables. I share one small apartment with my sick sister. If you want honesty, I can give you that, but I can't give you a world like this. I don't belong here." Charles studied her intently, then shook his head. "That's exactly why you belong here more than anyone. Do you know how rare it is to meet someone untouched by the gravity of wealth? You didn't see a billionaire or a beggar. You saw a man being humiliated, and you refused to let him be erased." His voice steadied, though it carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Emma, I am searching for someone who sees me, not the fortune attached to me. You've already proven you can." The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma's hands trembled against the edge of the table. Part of her wanted to rise, to escape the golden prison of that room. Another part, quieter, but stronger, wanted to stay, to listen, to see where this impossible thread might lead. Finally, she managed. "If I stay, if I trust you, what then?" Charles leaned back, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with something more than gratitude. "Then, Emma, your life will never look the same, and neither will mine." Her breath caught. She felt the floor shift beneath her, invisible yet undeniable. Every instinct screamed that she stood on the edge of something vast and dangerous, yet also extraordinary. In that moment, Emma realized she had been seen twice. Once by a man in rags, and once by the same man cloaked in power. Both versions had asked her the same unspoken question: "Will you stand with me?" But even as she struggled to answer, she sensed there was more. Something he had not yet said. Something that would turn her world on its head once revealed. And Charles, watching the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, knew the time for half-truths was ending. The final revelation still waited in the shadows, sharp and inevitable. The following Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the city scrubbed clean. By a week of storms, sunlight streamed across wet streets, throwing diamonds of light onto the cafe windows. For Emma, It should have been just another shift wiping tables, refilling cups, enduring sit-along glances from Marcy and the customers who whispered louder now. Their curiosity sharpened like knives, but something in her chest felt restless. A quiet tremor that warned her the world was about to change again. The bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up immediately. She had learned to school her reactions, to avoid feeding gossip, but the stillness in the room gave him away. She turned and froze. Charles had returned, not in polished shoes or pressed suits, not with silk scarves or carefully combed hair. He walked into the cafe in the same ragged coat she remembered, his shoes scuffed, his salt-tan pepper hair damp as though he had stepped straight out of another storm. The room went silent, the regulars narrowing their eyes, recognizing the same beggar they had mocked days earlier. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and slid into the window seat, the very same seat where humiliation had first bent his shoulders, where her $5 bill had restored his dignity. Emma's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She grabbed a cloth and approached, her steps unsteady. "Coffee?" she asked softly, her voice carrying enough warmth to cut through the tension. Charles looked up, meeting her eyes with a faintest smile. "Yes, black, just as before." A murmur rippled through the cafe. Marcy leaned toward Josh, whispering loudly, enough for half the room to hear. "She's at it again, playing safe for strays." The man in the corner snickered, the same one who had sneered before. Some people never learn. Emma's hands trembled around the cloth, but she steadied them. She turned to the counter, pulled 3 crumpled bills from her pocket, and set them down firmly. "On me," she said to the barista. Laughter erupted from one table. "What's the point? He'll never pay her back. She must think he's her prince in disguise." Another voice, dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe he'll sweep her off her feet in that fine coat of his." Emma ignored them. She brought the steaming cup to his table, set it down gently, and said in a voice steady enough to silence the room, "Your worth doesn't depend on the money in your pocket. Not then, not now." Charles's gaze lingered on her, his eyes glistening with something deeper than gratitude. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet. The scrape of his chair against the floor rang through the cafe like a summons. All eyes turned as he shrugged off the ragged coat and draped it over the chair. Beneath it, his posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and the faintest gleam of a tailored shirt caught the morning sun. Whispers erupted, sharp and confused. "Wait, is that? No, it can't be. Look at him." Charles reached into his pocket, withdrew a leather wallet, and laid a black card on the table. The gold letters gleamed, catching the light. Recognition rippled through the room like a shockwave. Someone gasped. Another whispered the name aloud, trembling. "Everlyn. Charles Everlyn." The cafe seemed to implode in silence. The very same people who had mocked him now shrank back into their seats, shame painting their faces pale. Marcy's smirk evaporated, replaced by a flush of disbelief. Even the barista froze behind the counter, his earlier arrogance crumbling into stunned silence. Charles turned, his voice calm, but carrying weight enough to fill the room. "You all saw me here. You all mocked, laughed, dismissed. Except for one." He gestured toward Emma, whose cheeks burned under the sudden spotlight. "She gave dignity when the rest of you stripped it away. She gave when she had little. That is worth more than all your titles and suits." The room held its breath. Emma wanted to disappear, but Charles stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I didn't come here for a coffee," he said, his voice soft now, "just for her. I came here because I needed to see if it was real, your kindness, your courage." And it was. He paused, letting the silence stretch until the world seemed to balance on the next words. "Emma Bennett, I have spent years surrounded by wealth, and yet I have never been seen until you. I am not looking for admiration. I am not looking for a servant. I am looking for someone to walk beside me, someone who sees the man, not the fortune you already have." Emma's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the tray until her knuckles ached. The cafe seemed to vanish, the stares and whispers fading into nothing. All that remained was him, standing before her. His heart lay bare in words no amount of wealth could polish. "Emma," Charles said, his eyes steady, unflinching, "I don't want a future wife chosen from gala halls and glittering parties. I want a woman who would pay for a stranger's coffee, even when mocked for it. I want you." Gasps rippled through the cafe, but Emma couldn't hear them. Her knees wobbled, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She saw flashes of her life, the cramped apartment, her sister's cough, the $3 folded in her wallet. And then she saw his eyes, the same ones she had seen that rainy morning, weary, proud, desperate to be human again. Tears pricked her eyes. "Why me?" she whispered, the words trembling out. Charles's lips curved into a small, certain smile. "Because you didn't ask that question when you gave. You simply gave. That is the woman I want beside me. That is the woman I choose." The cafe erupted into stunned silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air like thunder before a storm dot, and for the first time, Emma realized her life had shifted forever, not by chance, but by the smallest act of kindness offered to a man who had walked in from the rain.